But our second last speaker is the phenomenal Barbara Dischinger, who is the founder of International Women in Mining and has been involved within many different aspects of raw materials for, I'm going to say, a number of years, Barbara, because whilst you've got huge experience, you look so lovely and beautiful and young. It's fantastic. So I'm going to welcome Barbara Dischinger to our virtual platform and hand over to Barbara to introduce herself. And then we've got a couple of questions to discuss. So thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good evening, regardless of where you're based. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Sarah. So, yes, I am the director of IWIM, a global nonprofit which is pursuing gender equality in mining. And towards our aim of leading global change for social sustainability in the industry, we work with a multitude of stakeholders on different initiatives, and we're supported by a global team and board. And we're really excited about this project and this topic that you're bringing up today of trust.
So with that, Barbara, from your experience, what does trust actually look like?
It's an interesting conversation, trust, at the moment, isn't it? In a world full of, I don't know, fake news, algorithms pitting one side against another, you know, toxic messages left, right, and center. So do we still believe in trust, right? Do we still believe in humanity? For us, trust is sharing the responsibility for the work, the organization, the vision, and the sought after outcome. When companies share the responsibility for the land, the livelihood of communities, the safety and well-being of every person involved, and more, with the people and communities directly impacted by the operation, they are then building trust-based relationships. Trust looks like an open and honest dialogue where the parties can admit fault or lack of knowledge and be open to criticism and praise alike. Trust is when people bring their true, authentic selves to the workplace without having to modify their personalities to fit a predetermined mold. For women, this is when they can trust that their softer way of speaking, for example, or empathetic leadership and point of view is not seen as a fault, a weakness, or worse, a nuisance. So, for example, we want to foster, at IWIM, we seek trust through inclusive participation and representation of all people at all levels, from entry to executive. And we want to foster trust by making sure we're an advocate for a number of things, like making sure that everybody feels safe and supported in their environment, regardless of their gender, that everybody has access to equal pay and benefits in the sector, and that none of them are prone or can be a victim of violence and sexual harassment and discrimination because of their gender. So we feel that trust is really strengthened when everyone has access to skill development programs and career development, and everybody, be there men or women, can work together and have access to all opportunities.
So it's just a little thing then.
Yeah, just a tiny little thing.
And so, Barbara, with regards to, so I mean, I know that you speak a number of different languages, for example, and as well through IWIM, working with people all over the world. Does trust tend to vary between different cultures, or that expectation of what creates trust? Is there any variation there, or does it actually all boil down to the same thing?
No, I think it is expressed in different forms, in different cultures and traditions, actually. And our beliefs about what trust means. So, for example, what I said trust means to me may not mean the same to somebody else. And that's the difficulty, I think, around trust. So our beliefs about what trust means and how that is conveyed to another person can have a broad range of nuanced differences. So I find you soon realize when working with people from different cultures that things can get awkward, or that you thought you got on really well and then you never hear back what happened, or, you know, when to spend longer time asking how their family is doing, or when to go straight down to business. That in some countries you spend 3 hours at lunch and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And in others you keep working while you eat together a snack really quickly in a hurry. So all scenarios can be misinterpreted and seen as lack of respect by the other person, depending on where they're actually from. So we see that people tend to develop trust in two ways, either by being confident in someone's skills and experience, which is developed from professional interactions and is really more intellectual in nature. So I trust you, Sarah, because you are a professional, you're reliable, you deliver on time, you're very knowledgeable, etc. Or you develop trust via feelings of emotional closeness and empathy, right? So you will mostly have this relationship with family and friends. It comes from the heart and says, because I sense mutual affection and love, getting on together and feeling reciprocity, therefore I trust you. So in many countries, this last type is not just for family and friends and personal relationships, but also for business. Whereas in other parts of the world, mixing the two is seen as very unprofessional. So, for example, if you take countries like India, Brazil, China, Saudi Arabia, or Nigeria, to name some, separating the two can indicate a lack of sincerity and therefore trust. And for people of those countries, business is actually personal. It is especially linked to an individual, for example, rather than the company or organization that you work for, and the relationship can continue regardless of where that individual is working. In contrast, in North America and Northern Europe, relationships are defined by functionality or practicality. So you reduce emotional closeness as much as possible, and it's seen as really not okay. And if you work globally, it helps investing time, I would say, in nourishing relationships to build trust, regardless of what culture the person you deal with is from, as it always pays off, I believe, as a good investment. It's not necessary to be face-to-face to develop good relationships. It's also possible to do that virtually. And, you know, if you are too cautious or too politically incorrect, holding yourself back, because that's the right thing to do where you're from. For others, you can come across as not authentic, not showing the real you, and therefore you are untrustworthy. So accepting to go for dinner or join for drinks, letting your guard down, allows others to see who you really are, and that helps build the trust in some countries. So if you're wondering if wining and dining is worth more than getting down to business, it helps to know that in many cultures, the relationship is your contract, and that both are totally linked. I would say, as we're talking in a mining sort of a conversation, most producing countries are in emerging markets, and many of them are in relationship-based countries. So it helps to find out more where the country culture you work with is sitting on trust, feedback, hierarchy, negotiation, etc. And I can recommend an excellent book which goes into all of this in absolute detail, and all of you may have read it or know it. It's The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. But being emotionally and culturally intelligent requires awareness and practice. If it doesn't come naturally to you, or you are from countries at both extremes, once you know more about the person and they about you, you can learn not to take offense at things that are cultural, not about the actual content or your message. And Sarah, it's not because I speak several languages that I necessarily excel at this. Far from it. I haven't always got it right. I made colossal faux pas along the way. I have increased my knowledge and my awareness, it is true, and I try to pay attention to it daily. However, it takes effort. I'm actually a very fact-based introvert who is also neurodivergent and likes a two-dimensional lens. So adding a third dimension of emotions, social and cultural construct and framework on top of that, which differs depending on who you speak to, is a real challenge. This difference in trust building is not only true between different countries or regions. Within the same city or locality, there are varying means of establishing trust-based relationships. Every community is different, and any community relation practitioner will agree that every group and every person is a universe in themselves, and dialogue is a tool and as a means to discover what trust means to them. And you need to always find out and ask the question. So this applies to employees as well, of course. We cannot assume that all engineers, all metallurgists, or geologists are the same type of person. And I'd like to greatly emphasize that there is an overgeneralization of how we speak and consider women. We are not all the same either. I'll stop here for now, because I know I can go on for a long time.
No, it's fantastic, Barbara. And I'm loving that every person is a universe in themselves. So we're all unique. We all think and feel in different ways. But you brought up women as a whole there, and we've heard some fantastic stories earlier on in the week, such as Elevine from Malawi, who I'm sure you may well have come across, and so one of the things she's been doing is working with other women in African nations in that neighborhood, banding together to say, okay, how can we build some of the facilities that we might need for further beneficiation of our gemstones? And that's something where it's almost been that female network, people kind of saying, hey, let's band together and let's create something. I don't know if you've got any other case studies or examples of where what women can bring to the table sometimes to enhance levels of trust between groups that maybe don't trust themselves or trust one another at the moment. And one of the reasons why I asked that as well is, so John Crawley, who spoke at the close of play on Wednesday, he was talking about the Northern Irish peace process and actually attributed the fact that actually it was the women that turned around and said, look, we don't like you guys getting blown up and hurt. Let's go and speak to one another. So what can women do beyond, of course, being absolutely phenomenal in themselves?
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of women in mining organizations around the world, as you know. They came about at different times for different reasons, but as we are talking about trust, maybe they came about because of trust or the lack of trust. Many female professionals realize that their skills and intellects may be underutilized, that they don't receive the same pay, are not safe, etc. So they then develop organizations around it to develop better tools or advocate for, better solutions, if you want. We ourselves would like to be out of a job and for IRIM not to be needed, for example. For the industry not need or require specialized organization to standardize the way organizations include women into the mining operations. I would say that, what women bring to the table, we get that all the time. And interestingly enough, I don't see men getting asked what they bring to the table. Yeah. They're just at the table. So I feel we need to stop asking these questions to change the dynamic. Don't ask permission to be here. Just take the space, sit down. Everybody, be they green, pink, or purple, tall or short, old or young, or whatever, can bring valuable contributions to the conversations. It is true that we have a different style of leadership. As you say, we don't want to see men blown up. Let's have a conversation. And maybe we're very good at that. As mentioned before, people trust others when they share common purpose or values, when there's honesty and authenticity. And women are people, they bring the same talents, perspectives, know-how, and insight as men and everybody else. So I think we need to change really this dialectic a little bit. Mixing genders and intersectionality within brings diversity of thought, leading to better decisions, creativity, and innovation, which is not possible when there is groupthink. So I think that's really what organizations can and women and all of civil society can bring to mining at the moment. What you've been discussing here over the last few days, long-term sustainability, climate change, responsible mining and supply chains, energy transition, decarbonization, and I don't know how many other challenges were mentioned that mining faces, they will all be solved with the best talent. Now, the best talent is actually diverse talent. And it's not doing the same thing with the same people and the same tools as you've done all the time. And mining needs to basically innovate. It needs to be bold to do things differently with different people than it has done in the past, to seek and get at all of the solutions that it requires, and to ensure that people trust in this sector, which is essential, but unfortunately doesn't have the reputation it requires to be seen as for all of the benefits and the good stuff it brings. It too often, of course, we just look at it and at the bad stories.
Absolutely. And I think we've had a bit of discussion during this week in terms of that acknowledgement of the bad stories, but then also leaning into some of the good stories as well, in terms of being able to build some of those aspects of trust. So, Barbara, final question, if I will. And I'm aware that you're involved in a number of the different international groups that are having lots of fantastic discussions, etc. at the moment. Are things changing? Are we going to be able to meet these challenges of the future? And also as well, do you see any changes that are focused on or maybe indirectly might be able to help build that trust between different groups of stakeholders?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think the focus on decarbonisation critical raw materials is of great relevance right now, and we see that discussed all the time. We've attended conferences around that ourselves and participated, and it's absolutely relevant. You need everybody to be able to achieve sustainability, and so focusing on trust is key. We have been assisting in peer reviewing standards, recommendations for governments, focusing ourselves on a project called Inclusive Workplace Design, which aims to benchmark best practices, determine the means to establish and sustain inclusivity in large-scale mining, etc. So we've been doing a lot of work in that. But more broadly speaking, several things come to mind, and I know that we're sort of running out of time, but I think one thing that is important is to, for the different stakeholders, I feel that they're all talking at cross purposes and there's a lot of judgment at the moment. So for example, the Global North is so focused on energy transition, it is struggling to understand that the Global South is not against it. However, its main objective is actually energy security maybe at the moment. So you're all moving towards clean energy, and their transition is a complex process with several social and economic considerations. So they need to move, for example, from sort of not cooking with wood and waste, for example, resulting in indoor pollution and poor health. So they're looking at raising their standards of living, whereas you are already sort of really focusing on replacement of, fossil fuels to something else, right? And they're actually developing 400 new coal mines. So all of that is codependent in a way, and you would need for you to succeed in what you're doing, you need the metals and minerals coming from mining producing countries, which happen to be in the Global South, right? So I find mutual understanding of these differences will be essential, and trust building and those will be essential. I think more scrutiny is a good thing. We've discussing a lot of alphabet soups and lots of standards, but I find that more reporting, audits and certifications allow for greater transparency, and therefore this allows to build greater trust and stakeholders' interests being respected. This is a positive impact for everybody, and also I find investing in digital education, provision of internet in the Global South allows mining communities to have better access to information education, and it will allow them to keep mining companies and suppliers accountable via apps on mobiles. I think that is something that a lot more investment needs to go into. Multi-stakeholder initiatives may take longer, but its results or outcomes are built on trust, again, solid foundations, and are therefore longer lasting. I think more collaborations and partnerships in mining will be key to solve all of the issues in the sector, and be prepared to be uncomfortable. Own up to not knowing everything. Be aware of your own unconscious biases, and that you have some, try and understand other cultures, be curious, ask questions, and don't overgeneralize. Every mining community is not the same, every person's not the same, and don't speak for those that aren't in the room, or don't write policy without consulting those it is for. I think that is crucial, and I see it very often at lots of conferences. And lastly, things shift all the time, right? What was true in January in mining may not be true in July. So don't be surprised by the fast pace of change. Thank you.
I'm loving it. Thank you so much for that, Barbara. And I'm going to be listening to this recording later and making lots of notes of that list, because as well, in terms of don't write policy without making sure you have the right people in the room, especially those people who are going to be impacted by it, was something that we really looked into yesterday afternoon in a very powerful way. But Barbara, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us here today and sharing your wonderful insight. So thank you, Barbara. Round of applause. Fantastic.
Thanks for having me.